What you are about to hear is not just another news story. It is a moment that is raising serious questions about freedom, journalism, and power in the United States. When a well-known journalist can be arrested for filming a protest, it forces everyone to stop and ask where the line has been crossed. This story is about Don Lemon, the First Amendment, and a case that many legal experts say should never have happened. Breaking news emerged late last night when former CNN anchor Don Lemon was arrested on federal charges. The arrest is connected to a protest that took place earlier this month inside a church in St. Paul, Minnesota. According to Lemon, he was present in the church as a journalist, not as a protester. He says he was there to document events as they unfolded. The protest involved demonstrators interrupting a church service to speak out against immigration enforcement actions. A magistrate judge had already rejected an earlier attempt to bring charges against Lemon. Despite that rejection, federal prosecutors later moved forward and obtained his arrest. Don Lemon was taken into custody in Los Angeles and is scheduled to appear in federal court. His attorney, Abby Lowell, has described the prosecution as an unprecedented attack on the First Amendment. Legal analysts and journalists immediately reacted with concern, calling the arrest deeply troubling for press freedom. The case has sparked debate over whether journalists can be criminally charged simply for reporting from the scene of a protest. At the time of the incident, Don Lemon was working as an independent journalist and was no longer employed by CNN. He was in Minnesota covering protests that followed two deadly shootings. One of the key events occurred in St. Paul, where protesters entered a church and disrupted a religious service. The disruption is central to the charges now being discussed. Lemon followed the protesters into the church while live streaming and conducting interviews. He spoke with protesters, church members, and attempted to speak with church leadership. Supporters of Lemon argue that following a protest to report on it is basic journalism. Critics of the arrest point out that journalists routinely cover disruptive and uncomfortable events without being considered participants. Lemon repeatedly stated during the live stream that he was there only to document what was happening. He made it clear that he was not part of the protest and was acting in his professional capacity as a reporter. Legal experts say the government appears to be relying on a law known as the FACE Act. This law is most often used in cases involving obstruction of access to abortion clinics. It also includes provisions that prohibit interference with religious worship. The government is arguing that the protest created fear and disrupted the right to worship. The key question many are asking is how a journalist covering the event could be held criminally responsible for the actions of protesters. According to documents previously filed, authorities focused heavily on Lemon's own words during his live stream. In one moment, he described the emotional state of people inside the church, including children who appeared frightened and were crying. Prosecutors appear to argue that such descriptions support the idea that the protest created fear. However, critics say describing fear is not the same as causing it, especially when done as part of reporting. Even more confusing to observers is the fact that no formal charges were initially unsealed at the time of Lemon's arrest. Lemon and his legal team reportedly did not know exactly when he would make his first court appearance. This lack of transparency has added to concerns about the fairness and intent of the prosecution. The case has drawn comparisons to other recent actions involving journalists. Just weeks earlier, federal agents searched the home of a Washington Post reporter in an unrelated investigation. Although that reporter was not charged, many viewed the search as another sign of increasing pressure on the press. Taken together, these incidents have fueled fears of a broader crackdown on journalism. During the protest coverage, Lemon clearly stated on camera that he was exercising his constitutional rights. He spoke about due process and the importance of the Constitution. He also made comments about the role of protest in American democracy, saying that disruption has historically been part of exercising constitutional rights.
These statements are now being cited by prosecutors as part of their case, which critics say is a dangerous precedent. Lemon later released a video stating that federal agents had come to his door because he filmed a protest as a member of the media. He questioned how constitutional rights can exist if journalists can be arrested for doing their jobs. His remarks echoed concerns shared by many press freedom advocates who say the case could chill future reporting. The situation escalated further when it was revealed that another journalist, Georgia Fort, was also arrested in connection with the same protest. Both Lemon and Fort were reportedly charged with civil rights violations related to freedom of religion. They face the possibility of significant prison time if convicted. These charges were announced publicly by Attorney General Pam Bondi, who stated that the arrests occurred at her direction. Bondi released a statement saying that people have the right to worship freely and safely. She warned that those who violate that right would be pursued by the government. Critics argue that this statement ignores the role of journalists and fails to distinguish between protesters and reporters. Behind the scenes, reports suggest that many career prosecutors and investigators resisted bringing these charges. Sources say that experienced officials inside the Justice Department believed the evidence did not support the case. Some prosecutors reportedly refused to sign on to the charges, leaving political appointees to move forward instead. This resistance has only strengthened arguments that the case is politically motivated. Observers note that Don Lemon has been a frequent critic of Donald Trump and has been targeted by Trump in public statements and social media posts for years. Legal analysts say such public hostility could raise serious questions about selective prosecution.
The controversy deepened when reports revealed that 2 judges had already rejected earlier attempts to approve charges related to this case. A federal magistrate judge declined to sign off on the complaint, stating that it did not meet the legal standard required. Another judge reached the same conclusion. This is extremely rare in federal criminal cases, where the threshold to move forward is usually very low. Legal analysts say this alone signals how weak the case appears to be. Despite these rejections, the Justice Department continued searching for a way to move forward. Eventually, political appointees at the highest levels approved the charges. No career prosecutors signed the final documents. This fact has raised alarm among legal experts, who say it suggests pressure from above rather than a case driven by evidence. Sources inside the Justice Department have reported internal conflict over the case. Prosecutors in both Minnesota and Los Angeles reportedly resisted involvement, saying the facts did not align with the charges. Some officials are said to have stepped aside rather than participate. Around the same time, the acting head of the FBI's Minnesota office was reportedly removed amid disagreements over how the case and related investigations were being handled. These developments have fueled claims that law enforcement agencies are being reshaped to prioritize political loyalty over legal judgment. Critics say offices are being hollowed out, leaving fewer experienced professionals willing or able to push back against questionable cases. This pattern, they argue, mirrors past efforts to target perceived political enemies. During court proceedings, Don Lemon made a brief public statement. He thanked supporters and said he had no clear understanding of why he was being prosecuted. He emphasized that he has spent decades covering the news and would not stop now. He stated clearly that journalism is protected by the First Amendment and that he would continue doing his job. He said he would not be silenced and looked forward to his day in court. Legal commentators noted that Lemon's statement was short and carefully worded. Lawyers often advise clients not to speak at all during active cases, but Lemon chose to reaffirm the basic principle that reporting is not a crime. Many analysts said his remarks were effective because they focused on rights rather than politics. Experts reviewing the charges say the government is attempting to argue that Lemon's reporting somehow violated the freedom of worship of those inside the church. They describe this as a novel and highly questionable legal theory. Historically, courts have drawn a clear line between committing a crime and documenting one. Simply filming or asking questions does not make a journalist part of a conspiracy. Footage from inside the church shows Lemon repeatedly identifying himself as a journalist. He told people he was not part of the protest and that he was there to document events. He filmed interactions between protesters and church members, describing what he observed in real time. Media experts say this is standard reporting practice and protected activity. Supporters argue that if this case is allowed to stand, it could fundamentally change how protests are covered. Journalists often report from chaotic and tense environments. They follow crowds, enter public spaces, and document conflict. If doing so becomes grounds for arrest, many fear reporters will avoid covering important stories altogether. The case also raises concerns about unequal enforcement of the law. Critics point out that the FACE Act has been applied selectively. In the past, individuals convicted under the same law for blocking abortion clinics were pardoned. At the same time, the current administration has said it would limit the use of the law in abortion-related cases while aggressively applying it to protests involving places of worship. This double standard has not gone unnoticed. Legal scholars say it undermines confidence in the justice system and suggests that the law is being used as a tool rather than applied consistently. The perception of fairness, they warn, is just as important as fairness itself. The arrest of Georgia Ford has also drawn strong reactions. She is a local journalist and a mother who documented the same protest. Community leaders and journalism organizations say her arrest sends a chilling message to reporters, especially those working independently or at the local level. They argue that independent journalists often lack the legal resources of large media organizations, making them more vulnerable. Statements from journalism groups have been blunt. They say the First Amendment is not optional and that journalism is not a crime. They warn that when journalists are arrested, the public should be deeply concerned. Without a free press, they argue, abuses of power go unexposed. The broader context of the protests also matters. They took place after the killing of Renee Good and later Alex Preddy, both of whom were killed by federal agents. These deaths sparked widespread anger and demonstrations. Protesters were demanding accountability and transparency. Journalists were there to document both the protests and the government response. Many observers say charging journalists in this context looks like an attempt to suppress coverage of controversial actions. Polling has shown growing public opposition to aggressive immigration enforcement tactics. Critics say silencing reporters will not change public opinion, but will damage democratic norms. Legal analysts say the government may be trying to make an example of Lemon and Ford. Even if the case is eventually dismissed, the process itself can be punishing. Arrests, legal fees, and public scrutiny can deter others from taking similar risks. This is often described as a chilling effect, where fear prevents lawful behavior. The First Amendment exists precisely for moments like this, experts say. It is meant to protect speech and press freedom when those in power are uncomfortable with scrutiny. If these protections fail now, many warn they may fail when they are needed most.